Hi guys, so before we get into it, the usual disclaimer that you'll find all my other Hammer reviews in my Hammer playlist, and there will be spoilers today for this very old movie. So this is an extremely odd affair that we've got here. The story involves a kind of cargo ship, I guess, but it also carries passengers as well. There's only somewhere between 6 and 10 passengers, and they're all escaping some kind of dodgy situation from back home, and that's the reason why they're not travelling on a more typically commercial ship. So you've got one character who is running away from some kind of employment tribunal, you've got another character who is smuggling explosive contraband on this particular vessel, and so on. They're all running from something, but they're not bad people. They're just kind of getting away for a while. They're fleeing to South America, or at least I presume that's where they're going. I seem to remember Caracas being mentioned as a destination in this, so possibly the ship is travelling somewhere near South America, but the ship never reaches land in this because they come across like this dangerous seaweed that's full of tentacles, and this stuff is like spread for miles around. There's a bit more to the plot than what I'm giving you, but to cut a long story short, this is what we get to in this movie, and the ship gets stuck in this stuff and it can't go anywhere, and the characters are suddenly embroiled in this battle for survival, not just against the tentacles, but also there's like giant crabs and giant scorpions and a strange pirate ship nearby that has these people marooned in it that have gone a little bit stir crazy. It's a really dangerous world that we've suddenly arrived at. But it's not a continent. I will say that the title in this is very misleading. Like I said, I don't think we ever reach land. There's a chance that this marshy area with the tentacles and seaweed might be just slightly off the coast of somewhere, but there's no evidence of an actual lost continent. Incidentally, let me just address the fact that I've called this a horror film on my thumbnail, because I think some people might take umbrage with that. Coming into this, I thought this was going to be another one of Hammer's, shall we say, fantasy type films. This is actually described as an adventure film on Wikipedia, but it's not that for me. It's absolutely a pure horror film. The closest Hammer film to this that I can think of is 1 Million Years BC, that Raquel Welch film, but with that, there were also big, large creatures in that film, like giant iguanas and giant turtles and things like that, which was absolutely what you would call horror, but it was only a little part of that film. A lot of 1 Million Years BC was just watching tribal politics. There was a love story in there. It was a chance for us to see some really bygone era. There were a lot of different ingredients in that pot. Horror was only a little fraction of it, if you like. So I've got no problems with 1 Million Years BC being described as a fantasy film, but The Lost Continent, there's nothing really to it other than the fact that it's a creature feature, and there are also some crazy Spanish pirates. So for me, this is absolutely a horror film all day long. It was directed by Michael Carreras, who mostly produced Hammer films, but every now and again he turned his hand to directing. He did a couple of the Mummy films, he did Maniac in the early 60s, and he did this one. In terms of the actors, nobody that I personally recognise. There's no big star in this. There's no Raquel Welch or Peter Cushing or anybody like that. I did spot Michael Ripper in an early scene. He's playing like a crew member, and then he kind of vanishes. I don't remember seeing him in anything more than the one scene that he shows up. There are some nice women to look at. Nobody that I personally recognise, but that they're certainly very visually appealing. There's one blonde woman who is quite stunning, actually, and she survives several scenes in this that I suspect she wouldn't have done had she been any other character. It's like Carreras deliberately wanted to keep this gorgeous model alive for as long as he possibly can. Even more ridiculous, there's this other woman who is notable only really for her cleavage. She just randomly runs out of the fog halfway through this film. She seems English to me, and yet for whatever reason she was apparently captive on a Spanish pirate ship off the coast of South America, but I'm not going to overthink it, I guess. This film is extremely gnarly, I'll give it that. Not so much in the gore, because there isn't any, but just the implication of suffering that you get here. There are several times when characters get sucked into these disgusting looking mouths with giant teeth and suckers, and it just looks horrible. There are other times where people get strangled by tentacles or giant claws. There's a lot of agony happening in this film, you can tell. If I'd have watched this film as a kid, it would have absolutely horrified me. I'm not surprised that this film was never on terrestrial TV in the UK when I was growing up, at least to my knowledge. It was actually X-rated when it first came out, back when controls were a lot tighter on that sort of thing. It probably wouldn't even get more than a PG now, but some of the practical effects are just disgusting. You might fall into one of two camps when you watch this. Camp number one, you will genuinely be scared by what you're seeing because it really will make your skin crawl. Just the design of some of the monster faces. There's this one octopus squid type creature that crawls up the side of the ship in the dead of night and attacks two characters up on deck. The fact that it could even go up the side of the ship I found really unsettling, but then the design of the thing's face is just really icky, and that's not the only creature in this film either. Then you've got these Spanish pirates who absolutely reminded me of the cult in Silent Hill. You know, those people who, because they've been trapped in Silent Hill for so long, they've gone a bit stir crazy, they've gone religious, they start sacrificing newcomers who come along. You get that exact same situation in this film, except here the pirates are quite bizarrely led by a child who just reminds me of that irritating little shit from Game of Thrones who ended up choking on his own poison. And the pirates have got this thing where if anybody messes up or fails a mission within their little group, they'll get thrown to this octopus creature that's like at the bottom of this little pit. So like a trapdoor opens and they'll throw people in from time to time. We see this happening at least once, and it's just awful to watch. Like, you can just imagine how horrible it would be to die in this way. It reminds me of the Sarlacc pit from Return of the Jedi. It's just as gross as that. It's absolutely awful. But in this film, the bizarreness of all the creatures is not the strangest thing about it. That would have to go to the crazy way that people try and traverse the seaweed / tentacles, because in this film people put on these like giant paddle boards on their feet and balloons on their shoulders to just try and get from A to B, and it's like, okay, why would you risk that unless you were out with food and water, which the characters are never in this film. But also it just looks really silly the way that the characters are bounding over the seaweed and tentacles in this fashion. They're like children's entertainers who just come into the room at a children's party. They're bounding in and, hi kids, but in this film obviously they'll be terrified when they're trying to do these weird looking movements. But it's just another odd thing about this film. This film should have been called Oddworld, not The Lost Continent. Another thing about this movie is that it's way too overstuffed with characters, to the point where even the principals don't really get that much characterization. Plus, what this means is that even when people die in this, half the time I'm looking at them thinking, okay, I sympathise with the fact that you're going through agonising pain right now, but have I even seen you before in this film? Did you have a line in that other scene? Are you related to that other character maybe? You know, these thoughts are going through my head. The deaths are just not having that much impact on me a lot of the time. I get why the movie is overpopulated. I think with a boat this size, it would have been slightly unrealistic to just have one captain on a steering wheel and that's it. It does feel realistic that there would be lots of crewmen and seamen for a boat this size. And I guess the fact that they are here does add a certain sense of frantic chaos to proceedings when people are running here, there and everywhere trying to get on lifeboats and things. Plus it means we get to have quite a large-scale pirate battle on deck later on, sort of. But even so, I still would have preferred the numbers in this to have been kept at like 6, 7 tops. I think it would have added a lot more atmosphere to proceedings, and then the deaths, when they came along, would have been more meaningful. Another part of this film which is not taken to its full potential is the subplot with the explosive substance. Because this film came out in the late 60s, they couldn't do that much with pyrotechnics. You know, I mean, they make a token effort to set the Sarlacc pit on fire, and certainly the Spanish ship gets set on fire, but it's still not enough for me. When you take the time to set up this galley full of buckets of explosive stuff, you know, when it comes to the end, I want to see chaos, I want to see tentacles on fire, I want to see creatures wailing, you know, I want the full shebang, and I don't quite get that. But I understand the limitations that they probably had when they were making this. probably this film could have done with getting made in the more practical effects laden 1980s. The end to this film that I would have liked to have seen, it is similar to the one that you get at the end of The Thing. You know, where Kurt Russell just decides, screw it, and he goes around pouring petrol everywhere, and then he just lights the place up. That's what I wanted to see happen to this general area. I wanted to see all the tentacles on fire and creatures on fire. That's what I wanted to see, and I don't quite get that, sadly. Come to think of it, I don't actually know how the characters get out of Dodge in this film. So we see the Spanish ship on fire, and then we just kind of move to a funeral sometime later on. I don't know how they escape. And I've only just watched the film, so I don't think I missed a scene or anything like that. I literally just don't know how they get out of this. Although the funeral scene is not good for me. You know, this idea that the boy king is actually a good person, really. Okay, fine, but it's just a bit late in the day to try and give me that. For me, he's just an irritating little shit, and I just didn't want that plot development. And also the fact that the funeral actually takes place at the beginning of the film in the prologue, and then the rest of the film is a flashback. That's also ill-advised for me. It just gives away who's going to survive the movie. Totally pointless. But overall, you know what, I still enjoyed it. If you're a person who came out of 1 million years BC thinking less about Raquel Welch's bikini and more about how cool it was to see humans going up against large creatures, or at least if you were thinking about both of those things in equal measure, then you will probably get a kick out of watching this little offshoot of 1 million years BC. This is a fun little Ed Wood type movie. I did enjoy it. It's got loads of things you can point at and pick at, but it's just a little bit of Hammer fun, and where's the harm in that? So before we wrap up, I'll quickly show you the version of the film that I've got. Here is my DVD copy of The Lost Continent. Studio Canal it was who restored this, and normally they go for a black background with their DVD covers. This time they've gone for a white one. I don't know why, but I don't really care either way, to be honest. There's no special features on this, which is a shame, but the most important thing is that the visuals are great, audio great, so no complaints. This is absolutely a perfectly fine copy of the movie. Some interesting descriptions on the back. The Lost Continent, one of Hammer Studios' most obscure and demented creations. Yes, I'd go along with that. Features a mesmerising performance from singer Dana Gillespie. If that's the blonde, then fine. I guess she's sort of mesmerising in this movie, but not from an acting standpoint, I wouldn't say. There's a swinging soundtrack from 60s Curios, The Peddlers. I've never heard of that group. And in fact, I never even noticed the music in this film, which tells me that it was probably functional but unremarkable. This film is a must for any fans of extremely rare, extremely odd, cult 60s cinema. Okay, fine. Right, so let's get to the bag of terror and find out what sort of score I'm going to give this film. So we've got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. I think that's fair. This is a fun movie, certainly not one of Hammer's best, but I would certainly rank it way above a lot of the weaker ones in Hammer's set. So there we have it. I don't think they made a sequel to this. I think this is very much a one-off in the Hammer catalogue, unless you bunch it in with 1 million years BC, I guess. But it's a totally different type of movie for me. Anyway, I will leave it there for today. I'll be back soon to do another Hammer review. I don't yet know which one I'm going to do next, but all will be revealed shortly. Until next time, cheerio, bye-bye.